The cry cut through the midnight forest like a blade through silk. Ara's eyes flew open, her heart already racing before her mind caught up. She knew that sound. She'd heard it 100 times before, but never like this. Never with such raw terror threaded through it. "Mama!" She was on her feet before the second cry came, stumbling through the darkness of their shelter toward the small nest of blankets where Taran slept. Her hands found his small shoulders, trembling and damp with sweat. "I'm here," she whispered, pulling him against her chest. "I'm here, love. You're safe." But even as she said it, she felt the lies settle heavy in her throat. They were never truly safe. 10 years. 10 years hidden in these woods, moving every few months, never staying long enough to be found, never lighting a fire that might be seen, never speaking loud enough to be heard. And now her son had screamed into the night, as if calling every danger straight to their door. Taran's small body shook against hers, his face pressed into her neck. He was 8 now, tall for his age, but in moments like this he felt impossibly small, fragile, everything she had left in this world. "The man?" he gasped between sobs. "The man with the dark eyes. He was here. He was reaching for me." Ara's blood turned to ice. "Just a dream," she murmured, though her own hands were shaking now. "Only a dream, Taran. He can't find us here." But she didn't believe it anymore. Cale's face rose in her mind, sharp and cold, the way he'd looked the night she ran, the way he'd smiled when he told her Taran belonged to him now, that the bond couldn't be broken, that she could run if she wanted, but he would always come for what was his. She'd believed him then. She still believed him now. Ara held Taran tighter, rocking him gently as his breathing began to slow. The shelter around them was barely more than a lean-to, woven branches and moss against the autumn chill. Tomorrow they would have to move again, find somewhere deeper, somewhere darker, somewhere he couldn't reach. She closed her eyes and let herself remember, just for a moment, what it had been like before, when she'd had a place in the pack, a name, a future. Before Cale had taken it all. 3 miles south, Alpha King Veyron stopped mid-stride. The sound came faint through the trees, barely more than a whisper on the wind. But he heard it, felt it like a hook in his chest, sharp and sudden, a child's cry. He turned his head toward the northern border, his wolf rising to attention beneath his skin. These woods were empty. Had been empty for years. The patrols reported nothing, season after season. No scent, no tracks, no sign of life beyond deer and foxes. But that cry had been real. Veyron's jaw tightened. He should return to the palace, should send a patrol in the morning to investigate. That was protocol, that was reasonable. But his feet were already moving. He shifted as he walked, letting his wolf rise, just enough to sharpen his senses. The autumn night air carried a dozen scents, none of them human. Pine and damp earth, rotting leaves, the distant musk of a bear den, far to the east. And then, beneath it all, something else. Smoke. Old smoke, carefully buried. Fear. His pace quickened. The cry didn't come again, but he didn't need it to. His instincts pulled him forward, unerring, through the darkest part of the forest, where even the moonlight struggled to reach. This was the old wood. The forgotten wood. No one came here. No one was supposed to be here. Veyron slowed as the scent grew stronger. Not just fear now, something warmer. Milk and honey. A woman's scent, faint and careful, as if she'd spent years learning how to disappear. And beneath it, sharper and brighter, the scent of a child. His wolf surged. Veyron forced himself to breathe slowly, to keep his steps quiet. Whoever they were hiding. Hiding from something. Hiding from someone. Maybe from him. He stopped at the edge of a small clearing, barely visible in the darkness. There, tucked against the base of an ancient oak, was a shelter so subtle he almost missed it. Branches and moss, woven together with the kind of skill that came from necessity, from desperation. And inside he heard it. A woman's voice, low and soothing. "Sleep now," she whispered. "I won't let anything hurt you." Veyron's chest tightened. He should leave. Should send someone else. Someone less threatening. Someone who wouldn't terrify a woman living alone in the woods with a frightened child. But he couldn't make himself turn away. "I know you're there," the woman said suddenly, her voice still quiet but no longer soft. "I can hear you breathing." Veyron went still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The forest held its breath around them, waiting. "I'm not here to harm you," Veyron said finally, pitching his voice low and steady. "Careful. I heard a cry. I wanted to make sure you were safe." Silence. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shelter. She was small, he noticed first. Slender in a way that spoke of too many hungry seasons. Her hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders, tangled and wild, framing a face that might have been beautiful if it hadn't been so haunted. But it was her eyes that stopped him, wide and luminous in the moonlight, the color of honey and amber. Eyes that had seen too much. Eyes that held a wariness so deep it made his wolf ache. She stood between him and the shelter, her body angled to block his view of whatever lay behind her. Her hands were steady, but he could see the tension in every line of her frame. Ready to fight, ready to run, ready to do whatever it took. "We're fine," she said, and her voice was stronger than he expected. Steadier. "We don't need help." Veyron took a careful step back, lifting his hands slowly where she could see them. "I'm Veyron," he said quietly. "Alpha King of the Western Territory. These are my lands." Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Fear. "I know who you are," she whispered. And then, before he could respond, she did something he didn't expect. She dropped to her knees. "Please," she said, and now her voice broke. All that careful strength crumbling in an instant. "Please don't make us go back." Veyron's heart stopped. Behind her, from inside the shelter, a small face appeared. A boy, perhaps 8 or 9, with his mother's honey eyes and a tangle of dark curls. He clutched a ragged blanket to his chest, staring at Veyron with a mixture of terror and something else. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. "Mama?" the boy whispered. The woman reached back without looking, her hand finding his automatically, holding him close, protecting him even on her knees. And Veyron understood, in that moment, exactly what he was seeing. Not trespassers, refugees, running from something that scared them more than an Alpha King in the darkness. If you find yourself feeling what she feels tonight, please subscribe and stay with me for the next story. Veyron's hands remained raised, open and still in the moonlight. He didn't move closer, didn't speak, just waited as the woman knelt before him, trembling. Her son watched from the shelter, those honey eyes wide and unblinking. "I'm not here to take you anywhere," Veyron said finally, keeping his voice as gentle as he knew how. "But I need to understand. Who are you running from?" The woman's breath hitched, her fingers tightened around her son's hand. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "Please, We'll leave your territory. We'll go north. Or east. Just give us until morning." Veyron's chest ached at the desperation in her voice, at the way she held herself between him and the boy, as if her small frame could possibly stop an alpha if he meant them harm, as if she'd spent years learning to be a shield. "You're already on my land," he said quietly. "Have been for some time, I think. These woods don't hide scent as well as you hope." Her face went pale. "But I haven't come to punish you," Veyron continued, lowering his hand slowly. "I came because I heard a child cry out in fear, because no one should be alone in these woods at night, especially not—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Especially not a mother protecting her son." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust. Not yet. But perhaps the smallest loosening of that terrible tension. "How long have you been out here?" Veyron asked. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to the forest floor, to the scattered leaves and exposed roots. 10 years, she said at last, so quietly he almost didn't hear. 10 years this autumn. Veyron felt the words settle over him like a weight. 10 years. A decade spent hiding in the wilderness. A decade of hunger and cold and fear. A decade of raising a child in the shadows, always running, always alone. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Her eyes lifted to his. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Thought perhaps she'd forgotten how to give her name to anyone. "Ara," she whispered. "My name is Ara. And your son?" She glanced back at the boy and something soft crossed her face, something that looked almost like hope buried beneath the fear. "Taran," she said. "His name is Taran." Veyron nodded slowly. He didn't miss the way she said it. His name, not someone else's claim, not a borrowed title. His. "Ara," Veyron said, letting her name settle on his tongue. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to trust that I'm asking because I want to help, not because I want to hurt you." She stiffened but didn't speak. "Who told you that you had to run?" Ara's face crumbled. Just for an instant. Just long enough for Veyron to see the girl she must have been before fear carved her into something harder. "A beta," she said, her voice breaking. "From the Eastern Pack. He claimed Taran was his. Said the bond couldn't be broken. That I had no right to keep him." Veyron's wolf snarled beneath his skin. "And you believed him?" "He was beta," Ara whispered. "I was nothing. Omega. No rank. No family. When I tried to refuse him, he said he'd take Taran by force, that the pack would side with him because he was strong and I was—" She closed her eyes. "Weak." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and final. Veyron took a slow breath, forcing his wolf back. Forcing himself to stay calm when every instinct screamed at him to find this beta and tear him apart. "What's his name?" Veyron asked quietly. Ara's eyes flew open. No, you can't. If you confront him, he'll know we're here. He'll come for us. He'll—" "Ara," Veyron's voice was steady. Firm, but not harsh. "I'm the Alpha King. If this beta made a false claim, if he threatened you and your son, then he answers to me, not the other way around." She stared at him, her breath coming quick and shallow. "Kale," she said finally, the name bitter on her tongue. "His name is Kale." Veyron filed the name away, let it settle cold and sharp in his memory. "Come with me," he said. Ara flinched. "What?" "To the palace. Both of you." Veyron kept his voice gentle, but he didn't soften the command. "You're on my land. Under my protection now. whether you asked for it or not. I'm not leaving you out here to freeze or starve while I investigate this beta's claim. He'll find out, Ara breathed. If we go to the palace, if anyone sees us, let him find out. Veyron's tone hardened just enough to carry weight. Let him come. And when he does, he'll face me, not you. Not Taran. Me. Ara shook her head, rising unsteadily to her feet. You don't understand. He has rights, ancient rights, bond rights, the council. The council answers to me. Veyron stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until he stood just beyond arm's reach. Close enough to be real, far enough not to crowd. And if Kale's claim is false, those rights mean nothing. But I can't help you if you're hiding in the woods. I can't protect you if I don't know where you are. Ara looked back at Taran, still huddled in the shelter. The boy's eyes were locked on Veyron now, no longer filled with quite so much terror. Will you hurt my mama? Taran asked, his voice small but clear. Veyron's heart twisted. He crouched slowly, bringing himself down to the boy's level. No, he said, meeting Taran's gaze directly. I won't hurt your mama. I promise. Do you promise not to take me away from her? The question hit harder than Veyron expected. I promise, he said quietly. You and your mama stay together, no matter what. Taran studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said. Ara made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Ara, Veyron said gently, rising to his feet again. Let me help you. She looked at him, tears streaming down her face now, catching the moonlight. Why? She whispered. Why would you help us? You don't know us. We're nothing to you. Veyron held her gaze, steady and sure. Because you've been alone long enough, he said simply. And because no child should grow up believing the only safety in the world is the shadows. Ara's breath hitched. She closed her eyes, and for a moment Veyron thought she might refuse. Might gather Taran and vanish into the forest before he could stop her. But then she opened her eyes again, and something in them had shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But a small, fragile thread of hope. If we come with you, she said slowly, and he finds out. If he comes for us and you can't stop him, then you run, Veyron said, and I'll make sure you have time to disappear again. But I don't think it'll come to that. Ara swallowed hard, looked at Taran, looked back at Veyron. One night, she said finally, we'll come for one night, and if it's not safe, then I'll help you leave. Veyron finished. You have my word. She nodded, slow and uncertain. Taran crawled out of the shelter, clutching his blanket. He moved to his mother's side, slipping his small hand into hers. Will there be food? He asked, looking up at Veyron with cautious curiosity. Veyron felt his chest tighten. Yes, he said gently. As much as you want. Taran's face brightened just a little. Ara squeezed her son's hand, then looked at Veyron one last time. Thank you, she whispered, and Veyron knew, in that moment, that everything had just changed. For all of them. The palace rose from the forest like something out of a half-remembered dream. Ara's breath caught as they emerged from the tree line, Taran's hand tight in hers. She'd seen it before, of course, years ago, but always from a distance, always as something unreachable, something that belonged to a life she'd lost. Now Veyron was leading them straight to its doors. The Alpha King moved ahead of them through the gardens, his stride steady and sure. He hadn't shifted back fully, she noticed, still carried that edge of wolf in the way he held himself, in the way his eyes scanned the shadows as if daring anything to emerge. Protecting them, she realized, even here, In his own territory, he was making sure nothing could reach them before he did. The thought made her chest tight. "Mama," Taran whispered, tugging her hand. "Is that really where we're going?" Ara looked down at her son. His face was pale with exhaustion, dark circles beneath those honey eyes. But there was something else there, too. Something she hadn't seen in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Wonder. "Just for tonight," she murmured, squeezing his fingers. "Remember?" Taran nodded, but his gaze never left the palace. The high stone walls, the warm light spilling from windows, the promise of warmth and safety, and everything they'd lived without for 10 years. Veyron stopped at a side entrance, away from the main hall. He glanced back at them, his expression soft. "Fewer people this way," he said quietly. "I thought you might prefer that." Ara's throat tightened. She managed a nod. The hallways inside were quiet, lit by soft oil lamps that cast gentle shadows on the stone. Ara kept Taran close, her hand never leaving his shoulder. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get back to the forest where she knew how to disappear. But Taran was so tired. And she was so tired. And Veyron's presence ahead of them felt steady, solid, like something she could almost lean against if she dared. They climbed a narrow staircase to the second floor. Veyron led them down another hallway, this one lined with closed doors. He stopped at one near the end and pushed it open. "Guest quarters," he said, stepping aside so Ara could see. "Not the grandest room, but it's warm, private. The door locks from the inside." Ara hesitated at the threshold, her heart hammering. She made herself look inside. The room was simple. A bed with clean linens. A small hearth with a fire already burning low. A window with thick curtains. A table with a basin and pitcher of water. And on the table, a tray. Bread and cheese and apples. A pitcher of milk. Taran made a small sound and pulled free of her hand. He darted into the room and stopped in front of the tray, staring at it as if it might vanish if he blinked. "Can I?" he whispered, looking back at his mother with desperate hope. Ara's vision blurred. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Taran reached out slowly, almost reverently, and picked up a piece of bread. He took a careful bite, then another, faster. Ara watched him eat, her chest so full of emotion she couldn't breathe around it. When had she last given him enough to eat? Really enough? Not just enough to survive? "Ara!" She turned to find Veyron watching her from the doorway. His eyes were dark and serious, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like pain. "Stay," he said quietly. "Rest. Both of you. I'll have more food sent up and clean clothes if you need them." "You don't have to," Ara started. "I know." Veyron's voice was firm, but not harsh. "But I want to. Let me." Ara looked at Taran again, at the way he was tucking into the food as if he might never see another meal, at the exhaustion carved into every line of his small body. "Just tonight," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Veyron studied her for a moment, then nodded. "The door locks," he repeated. "No one will disturb you unless you ask. And if you need anything at all, send for me." Ara swallowed hard. "Why are you doing this?" Veyron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. "Because 10 years ago, someone should have stopped Kale before he drove you into the woods," he said. "And no one did. That ends now." Ara's breath hitched. "Get some rest," Veyron said gently. He stepped back into the hallway, his hand on the door. I'll be nearby if you need me." And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Ara stood frozen in the center of the room, her heart pounding. She heard the faint click of the lock as Veyron secured it from the outside. No. She moved to the door and tested it. It opened easily. He hadn't locked them in. He just made sure no one could get in without her permission. The realization hit her like a wave. "Mama?" Ara turned to find Taran watching her, a piece of cheese clutched in his hand. His eyes were red-rimmed and glassy with exhaustion. "Is it safe?" he asked, his voice so small it broke her heart. Ara crossed the room and knelt in front of him. She took his face in her hands, gentle and sure. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But for tonight, yes, I think we're safe tonight." Taran nodded slowly. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, the way he used to when he was smaller, before fear taught him to hold everything inside. "I like him," Taran whispered. "The Alpha King. He's not scary like you said alphas are." Ara's chest tightened. "He's different," she admitted quietly. "But we still have to be careful, love. We still have to be ready to run if we need to." Taran pulled back, his honey eyes solemn. "I know, Mama." Ara kissed his forehead, then stood and guided him toward the bed. The mattress was soft, impossibly soft after years of sleeping on packed earth and moss. Taran climbed onto it and sank into the blankets with a sigh that sounded like relief and exhaustion tangled together. Ara pulled the covers over him, tucking them close around his thin shoulders. "Sleep," she murmured. "I'll keep watch." "You always keep watch," Taran mumbled, his eyes already drifting closed. "Maybe tonight you can sleep too." Ara's throat burned. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, watching as his breathing began to slow and deepen. "Maybe tonight you can sleep too." When had she last slept through a full night? Really slept? Without waking at every sound, every shift of wind? Without one ear always tuned to the forest, listening for the footsteps that would mean Kale had finally found them? She moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see out. The palace grounds stretched below, peaceful and quiet in the moonlight. Guards walked the perimeter in steady rotations, their movements calm and unhurried. Safe, she thought. This place was built to be safe, but safety was a lie she'd learned not to believe in. Ara let the curtain fall and turned back to the room, to her son, finally sleeping in a real bed, to the fire casting warm light across stone walls, to the door that locked and the food that hadn't been foraged or stolen, to the Alpha King's promise echoing in her mind. "You and your mama stay together, no matter what." Ara sank into the chair beside the hearth, pulling her knees to her chest. She should rest. Should let herself breathe for just one night. But old habits died hard. So she sat in the firelight and kept watch over her son, the way she'd done every night for 10 years, and tried not to think about the way Veyron's eyes had softened when Taran asked for food, or the way her own heart had answered when he'd promised to keep them safe. Ara woke to sunlight on her face and the disorienting softness of a real bed beneath her. For one heartbeat, she didn't remember where she was. Her body jerked upright, searching for Taran in the dim pre-dawn light of their shelter. But the light wasn't dim, and this wasn't their shelter. She turned her head and found Taran still curled in the blankets beside her, his breathing deep and even. The fire had burned down to embers. The room was warm and still. The palace. They were in the palace. Ara's heart hammered as memory flooded back. Veyron. The forest. The promise. One night, she slipped from the bed as carefully as she could, not wanting to wake Taran. Her body ached in unfamiliar ways. Sleeping on something soft had left her stiff and uncertain, muscles unused to comfort. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain back. Morning spread across the palace grounds in shades of gold and amber. The gardens below looked peaceful, unthreatening, too good to be real. A soft knock at the door made her spin around, her pulse spiking. "Ara?" Veyron's voice, quiet and careful. "Are you awake?" She crossed to the door and opened it just wide enough to see him. He stood in the hallway alone, dressed simply in dark trousers and a plain shirt. His dark hair was tied back, his expression calm. He looked less like an Alpha King and more like someone she might have trusted once. "I didn't mean to sleep," Ara said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I was supposed to keep watch." Something soft crossed Veyron's face. "You were exhausted. Both of you." Ara glanced back at Taran, still sleeping. "What time is it?" "Just past dawn." Veyron's tone remained gentle. "I brought breakfast. May I come in?" Ara hesitated, then stepped back and opened the door wider. Veyron entered carrying another tray. Fresh bread and honey. Sliced fruit. Hot tea. He set it on the table carefully, then turned to face her. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "I shouldn't have." Ara wrapped her arms around herself. "We should have left before sunrise, before anyone saw us." Veyron's expression didn't change. "No one will hurt you here, Ara. I gave you my word." "Your word doesn't matter if Kale is already here." The words hit like ice water. Ara's breath stopped. Her vision narrowed. The room seemed to tilt around her. "What?" The word came out, barely a whisper. Veyron moved toward her slowly, hands visible and steady. "He arrived an hour ago, requesting an audience with me. He doesn't know you're here yet, but we have to go." Ara was already turning toward the bed, toward Taran. "We have to leave right now, before he finds out. Before—" "Ara." Veyron's voice was firm but not harsh. "Listen to me." She spun back to face him, her whole body shaking. "You don't understand. If he's here, if he knows—" "He doesn't know," Veyron repeated. "He came because I sent word last night requesting his presence. I told him I had questions about Eastern Pact bonds and wanted his counsel as beta." Ara stared at him. You called him here?" "I need to face him, Ara. Need to hear his claim myself. And I need you to trust me enough to let me handle this." "Trust you?" Her voice broke. "I don't even know you. And you've brought the one person in this world I've spent 10 years hiding from straight to your door." Veyron held her gaze, steady and sure. "I brought him here because it's the only way to end this. If you keep running, he'll keep hunting. But if I confront him now, on my ground, with my authority, then you have a chance at real freedom." Ara pressed her hands to her face. Her thoughts were racing, scattered. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Taran and run. "What if you can't stop him?" she whispered. "What if the law sides with him?" "Then I'll change the law." Veyron's tone left no room for doubt. "But I don't think it'll come to that. I think Kale's claim is false. And I think he knows it. He'll demand to see Taran. He'll say he can demand whatever he wants." Veyron took one careful step closer. "He's not seeing Taran. He's not seeing you. Not unless you choose it." Ara lowered her hands, her chest tight. "And if he refuses to leave without us?" Veyron's eyes darkened. "Then he'll learn what it means to defy an Alpha King." The quiet certainty in his voice should have frightened her. But instead, for the first time in 10 years, Ara felt something close to hope. "You really think you can stop him?" she asked. I know I can. Veyron's expression softened. But I need you to stay here. Stay with Taran. Let me handle this. Ara wanted to argue. Wanted to insist she be there. That she face Kale herself. But the thought of seeing him again made her stomach turn. What will you tell him? She asked quietly. The truth. Veyron's voice was calm. That his claim is under investigation. That I found evidence suggesting bond fraud. And that until I'm satisfied with his answers, he has no rights to anyone in my territory. Ara's breath hitched. He'll be angry. Let him be angry. Veyron moved closer still, until he was just an arm's length away. Anger won't change the outcome, and it won't get him past me to you. Ara searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was a mistake. But all she saw was steady resolve. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Really? Veyron was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. Because I've been Alpha King for 15 years, he said. And in that time, I've seen what happens when those with power use it to control those without. I've seen bonds twisted into chains. I've seen fear mistaken for loyalty. His gaze held hers. And I'm tired of it. Tired of letting it continue because it's always been done that way. Ara felt tears prick her eyes. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not. Veyron's expression softened further. But I owe Taran a world where he doesn't have to grow up afraid. Where his mother doesn't have to choose between hiding and losing him. He paused. Don't you think he deserves that? Ara's throat closed. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then let me give it to him, Veyron said gently. Let me try. A small sound from the bed made them both turn. Taran sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. When he saw Veyron standing with his mother, he went very still. Is he here? Taran asked, his voice small and scared. The man from my dreams? Ara's heart shattered. She moved to the bed and gathered Taran into her arms. Yes, she said honestly, because she'd never lied to him about the danger. But he can't reach you. The Alpha King won't let him. Taran looked over her shoulder at Veyron, those honey eyes wide and searching. Promise? He whispered. Veyron crossed the room and crouched beside the bed, bringing himself to Taran's level. I promise, he said quietly. Your mama's right. He can't reach you here. And I'm not going to let him take you anywhere. Taran studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said. Veyron rose and looked at Ara one last time. Stay here, eat, rest. I'll come find you when it's done. Ara wanted to protest. Wanted to argue. Wanted to do something other than sit and wait while someone else fought her battles. But Taran's arms were tight around her, and Veyron's certainty was like a wall between them and the nightmare waiting below. Be careful, she whispered. Something flickered in Veyron's eyes, almost like surprise, as if no one had told him to be careful in a very long time. I will, he said, and then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Ara held Taran close and tried not to think about what was happening in the halls below. Tried not to imagine Kale's face when Veyron confronted him. Tried not to wonder if one Alpha's promise could really be enough to keep them safe after 10 years of running. But her hands were shaking as she reached for the breakfast tray, and she couldn't make them stop. Ara paced the small room until Taran finally asked her to stop. You're making me nervous, Mama, he said quietly from his spot on the bed. He'd eaten all the breakfast Veyron brought and was now sitting cross-legged, with his blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a cloak. Ara forced herself to sit in the chair by the hearth, her hands twisted together in her lap. Every muscle in her body coiled tight, ready to run the moment the door opened with bad news. What was happening down there? How long did it take to strip someone of their lies? To banish them? If Veyron even could. The thought sent ice through her veins. What if Cale had proof she didn't know about? What if he'd forged documents or convinced witnesses? What if the council sided with him simply because he was Beta and she was nothing? "Mama," Taran's voice pulled her back. "You're doing it again." She looked down and realized her leg was bouncing, her whole body vibrating with anxious energy. "I'm sorry, love," she murmured. She reached out and Taran came to her immediately, tucking himself against her side. She wrapped her arms around him and tried to breathe slowly. They sat like that as the morning stretched on. The fire burned low, the sunlight moved across the floor, and still no word came. Ara's mind spun through every terrible possibility. Veyron changing his mind, Cale convincing him, the guards coming to drag them both to the Great Hall, where Cale would be waiting with that cold smile. She was imagining escape routes through the window when footsteps finally sounded in the hallway. Ara was on her feet instantly, pulling Taran behind her. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. The knock was gentle, familiar. "Ara, it's Veyron." She crossed to the door on shaking legs and opened it. Veyron stood alone in the hallway. His expression was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in the way he held himself. "Is he gone?" The words tumbled out before Ara could stop them. Veyron stepped into the room and closed the door quietly behind him. He looked at Taran first, his gaze softening. "He's gone," Veyron said. "Cale is no longer welcome in this territory." Ara's knees nearly gave out. She reached for the chair to steady herself. You banished him?" Veyron moved to the table and poured himself water from the pitcher. His hands were steady, but Ara noticed the slight stiffness in his movements, as if he'd been holding himself rigid for hours and was only now allowing his body to relax. "I did more than that." Veyron took a slow drink, then set the cup down and turned to face her fully. "I went through the pack records. Every bond registration from the Eastern Territory for the past 15 years. Ara's breath caught. "And? There is no bond record between you and Cale, no contract, no witness signatures, nothing." Veyron's voice remained level, but she heard the edge beneath it, the anger he was keeping carefully contained. "He lied, Ara, about all of it." The room tilted. Ara sat down hard in the chair, her vision swimming. 10 years. 10 years of running because of a lie. "But he said..." Her voice came out hoarse. "He said it was ancient right, but the council had approved it. That I couldn't refuse because you were Omega and he was Beta." Veyron's jaw tightened. "And he knew you had no one to verify his claim. No family to stand with you. No Alpha to question him." Ara pressed her hands to her face. All those years in the forest. All those cold nights and hungry days. All of Taran's childhood stolen, because one man had lied and she'd had no power to prove otherwise. "What did he say?" she whispered. "When you confronted him?" Veyron's expression darkened. "He tried to maintain the claim at first. Said the records must have been lost, that bond rights existed regardless of documentation." He paused. "When I pushed harder, he changed tactics. Said you'd agreed to a private bond that didn't require registration." Ara's stomach turned. "I never agreed. He cornered me one night after a pack gathering. Told me he'd chosen me. When I said no, he grabbed Taran. Threatened to hurt him if I didn't comply. That's when I ran." She heard Taran's small intake of breath behind her. She hadn't told him the full story before, hadn't wanted him to carry the weight of knowing how close they'd come to losing each other. Veyron crouched in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. His gaze was steady and sure. "I told him that if his claim had been real, he would have filed it properly. that the absence of any documentation combined with your flight made it clear his intentions were unlawful. Veyron's voice dropped lower. I told him that attempting to claim someone through coercion and threats is not a bond. It's an assault, and that I would not tolerate it in any territory under my rule. Ara's throat closed. What did he do? He tried to argue, said it was Eastern Pact custom, that I had no authority to question their traditions. Veyron's eyes hardened. So I reminded him that I am Alpha King over all territories, and that his beta rank means nothing if I strip it from him. You stripped his rank? Ara could barely process the words. I did. Veyron's tone left no room for doubt. In front of the council, in front of witnesses. I declared his claim false and his actions criminal. Then I banished him from this territory permanently. If he returns, he'll be arrested. Ara stared at him. This man she'd met less than a day ago. This Alpha, who had taken her word over a beta's, who had used his power not to control her, but to free her. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you risk political conflict with the Eastern Pact for us? Veyron held her gaze. Because it's not a risk. It's the right thing to do. And if the Eastern Pact has a problem with me protecting a mother and child from a man who tried to claim them through threats, he paused, then they can bring that problem to me directly. Taran moved closer, peering around Ara's shoulder at Veyron. Is he really gone? The scary man? Veyron's expression softened completely. He's really gone, and he can't come back. Ever? Taran's voice was small and hopeful. Ever, Veyron confirmed gently. Ara watched her son's face transform. Watched 10 years of fear begin to crack and fall away. Taran's eyes filled with tears, and he pressed his face against Ara's shoulder, his small body shaking with silent sobs. Not fear this time. Relief. Ara held him close, her own tears spilling over. She looked at Veyron through blurred vision. Thank you, she managed. The words felt impossibly small for what he'd just given them. Veyron rose slowly. You don't have to thank me. You and Taran were owed justice. I just made sure you got it. He moved toward the door, clearly intending to give them privacy. But Ara found herself speaking before he could leave. Wait. Veyron paused, his hand on the door handle. What happens now? Ara asked. Are we free to go? Something flickered across Veyron's face. He turned back to look at her, his expression careful. You're free to do whatever you choose, he said quietly. If you want to return to your shelter in the woods, I won't stop you. If you want to seek refuge in another territory, I'll provide safe passage. He paused. But if you'd like to stay here, there's room. And you'd be welcome. Ara's heart stumbled. Stay? In the palace? Not as refugees. Veyron's voice remained steady. As guests, for as long as you need. Until you figure out what comes next. Taran pulled back from Ara's shoulder, looking up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. Can we, Mama? Can we stay? Ara looked at her son, at the exhaustion still carved into his young face, at the hope blooming there for the first time in his memory. Then she looked at Veyron, at the Alpha King who had listened when no one else would, who had fought when no one else had, who had given them back their freedom. Yes, she whispered. Yes, we'll stay. And when Veyron smiled, soft and genuine, Ara felt something shift deep in her chest, something that felt almost like the beginning of trust. 3 days passed like a slow exhale. Ara and Taran settled into the palace with a hesitancy that gradually softened into something close to comfort. Taran explored the gardens with wide-eyed wonder, and Ara found herself sleeping through entire nights for the first time in a decade. Veyron visited them each morning, never intruding, never pushing, just bringing breakfast and asking how they'd slept, checking if they needed anything. His presence became something Ara found herself watching for, listening for. On the fourth morning, he arrived with a question instead of just food. "Would you walk with me?" Veyron asked, his tone careful. "Just in the gardens. Taran can come too if you'd like." Ara glanced at her son, who was already nodding eagerly. "I want to see the fountain again," Taran said. "The one with the stone wolves." So they walked, the three of them moving through the morning garden as mist burned off the grass. An early sun painted everything gold. Taran ran ahead, his energy returning day by day, his laughter starting to sound like something real. Ara walked beside Veyron, acutely aware of the space between them, of how easy it would be to close that distance, of how much she wanted to and how terrified that wanting made her. "You don't have to keep checking on us," she said quietly. "I'm sure you have more important things to attend to." Veyron glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "What makes you think this isn't important?" Ara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She looked away, focusing on Taran as he crouched beside the fountain, trailing his fingers through the water. "I just meant, you've already done so much. More than anyone ever has. You don't owe us anything else." "I'm not here because I owe you anything," Veyron said, his voice low and steady. "I'm here because I want to be." Ara's heart stumbled. She risked a glance at him and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Ara," he said gently, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "What do you want?" Veyron stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Not what you think you should want. Not what's safe or practical. What do you actually want for yourself and Taran?" The question hit harder than she expected. Ara opened her mouth, then closed it again. What did she want? For so long, survival had been the only answer. Safety the only goal. But now, standing in the morning sun, with Kale banished and Taran laughing by the fountain, what did she want? "I want—" She started, then stopped. Tried again. "I want Taran to have a childhood. A real one. With friends and safety and a future that isn't just hiding." Veyron nodded slowly. "And for yourself?" Ara's throat tightened. "I don't know how to want things for myself anymore." "Then maybe it's time to learn." Veyron's voice was soft. "You've spent 10 years being only a mother, only a protector. But you're allowed to be more than that, Ara. You're allowed to want things." She looked at him, really looked at him. At the way the morning light caught in his dark hair. At the steadiness in his eyes. At the strength in his frame that had never once been used to threaten her. "What if I don't know how?" she whispered. Veyron smiled, gentle and patient. "Then we'll figure it out together." The words settled over her like a warmth she hadn't known she was missing. Together. As if he planned to stay. As if this wasn't just temporary shelter, but something that could become real. "I'm scared," Ara admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I'm scared to believe this is real. That you're real. That any of this won't just disappear the moment I let myself trust it." Veyron reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. When she didn't move, he took her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough with old scars, his grip gentle but sure. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm not asking you to stop being scared. I'm just asking you to stay, to give this a chance, to let me show you that not every alpha is a threat, that not every promise is a lie." Ara's eyes burned. She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled around hers with such careful tenderness. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to let someone in. How to trust again." "Then we'll take it slow." Veyron squeezed her hand gently. "As slow as you need. No pressure, no expectations. Just time and space to heal." Ara nodded, blinking back tears. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him how much his patience meant, how much his kindness had already started to mend something broken inside her. But the words wouldn't come, so instead she just held his hand and let herself stand there in the morning sun, feeling safe for the first time in 10 years. Taran's voice broke the moment. "Mama, come see!" Ara pulled her hand back, suddenly self-conscious. But when she looked at Veyron, he was smiling. Not disappointed, just warm. "Go," he said gently. "I'll be here." That evening, after Taran had fallen asleep, Ara found herself unable to settle. She paced the room, her mind spinning. Finally, she opened the door and stepped into the hallway. She wasn't sure where she was going until she found herself outside the study Veyron had shown her the day before. Light spilled from beneath the door. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What was she doing? What did she even want to say? The door opened before she could decide. Veyron stood there, surprise flickering across his face before it softened into something warmer. "Ara," he said. "Is everything all right? Is Taran okay?" "He's fine. He's sleeping." Ara wrapped her arms around herself. I couldn't sleep. And I thought..." She trailed off, not sure how to finish. Veyron stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, please." Ara entered slowly. The study was warm and comfortable, lined with books and lit by a low fire. Veyron moved to the hearth and gestured to one of the chairs beside it. "Sit," he said gently. "I'll make tea." Ara sank into the chair, watching as he prepared 2 cups with practiced ease. He handed her one and settled into the chair across from her, cradling his own cup. They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment. The fire crackled softly. Outside, night wrapped the palace in quiet. "Thank you," Ara said finally. "For this morning. For everything." Veyron's expression was gentle. "You don't have to keep thanking me." "I know, but I want to." Ara took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through her. I've never had someone just listen before. Just believe me, just help." "You shouldn't have had to do it alone," Veyron said quietly. "Any of it?" Ara looked down at her cup. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to change your mind, for this to turn into something else." "I won't." Veyron's voice was steady, sure. "I promise you, Ara, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to hurt you or Taran." Ara met his gaze across the firelight. Saw the truth there. The steadiness. The quiet strength that had nothing to do with dominance, and everything to do with simply being solid. "I think I'd like to stay," she said softly. "Not just for a little while. Really stay. If that's still all right." Something bright and warm crossed Veyron's face. "It's more than all right." "And maybe," Ara's voice wavered. She forced herself to continue. "Maybe I'd like to figure out what I want, what comes next. Not just for Taran. For me too." Veyron set his cup aside and leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like to be part of that, if you'll let me." Ara's breath caught. She set her own cup down with shaking hands. "I don't know how to do this, how to let someone close again." Then we'll learn together. Veyron held her gaze. One day at a time, one moment at a time. No rush, no pressure. Ara felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Real, fragile, terrifying hope. She stood, slowly. Veyron rose with her, watching her with gentle patience. Ara crossed the small space between them, her heart hammering. "Ara," Veyron said softly. "A question. A promise." She reached up and touched his face. Just her fingertips against his jaw. Testing, wondering if this was real, if he was real. Veyron went very still, waiting, letting her lead. "Thank you," Ara whispered, "for giving us our lives back." "You already had them," Veyron said gently. "I just made sure no one could take them away again." Ara rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Soft. Tentative. A question of her own. Veyron answered by wrapping his arms around her, careful and sure. The kiss deepened slowly, warmth spreading through Ara's entire body. Not desperation, not fear, just rightness. Like coming home after being lost for too long. When they finally pulled apart, Ara rested her forehead against his. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "I know," Veyron murmured. "But I've got you, both of you. For as long as you'll let me." Ara closed her eyes and let herself believe him. Let herself lean into the steady strength of his embrace. Let herself imagine a future that wasn't just survival. Outside, the palace settled into night. Inside, by the fire, something new began to take root. Something that looked almost like family. Almost like love. Almost like the life Ara had stopped believing she deserved. And for the first time in 10 years, she let herself hope it might actually last.